Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Court-Martail Podcast. Introducing your host for this evening first. He is the host with the most from the West Coast, the Bay Area Brawler, Skyler Greenberg. And his partner, he has colonized, energized, and revolutionized the podcasting wrestling world today. Your Colonial champion, Sean McCarty.
It's time to jingle those bells. It's time to hit those super kicks. It's time to talk about some wrestling here at CMP. It is the Court-Martail Podcast, ladies and gentlemen, and I am the man of the hour, the man with the power. I'm too sweet to be sour. I'm the Bay Area Brawler, Skyler Greenberg, taking the hosting duties today because we are in the holiday spirit and in the holiday mood. And with me, as always, is the man who is the leader of the CMP. He is a man. When you go up to him and you ask how he sings, he says he sings brilliantly, despite all the chaos that's happening around him. He's a man that when you talk to him about his choir group, he says he's the best of the group because look at what's around him. It is the Colonial champion, Sean McCarty. How you doing?
You know, sometimes I do feel like Roman Reigns in a sea of mediocrity, and all I really want is for the singing world to acknowledge me. But I am still in the middle of being acknowledged, as you are, Sky, as the greatest professional wrestling podcast on the internet, bar none, made by Smarks for Smarks, and I am happy to invite those people as well as anyone who cares to listen along for the ride. And Skylar, I'm excited for you to take the reins on this one. We've been wanting to do this show with this topic and particularly this spotlight for the better part of a month now, and I am excited to get into it as well as catch up on all of what we have got in store for us in the past couple of weeks that we have just not had the time for the upcoming segment to do.
I know, it's been one of those things where I've had to keep kind of like, hey, when are we talking about Ernie Ladd? Hey, when are we talking about Ernie Ladd? And now this week, we finally got the time to talk about Ernie Ladd. But before we get to Ernie and Antonio, we need to talk about the news of the week.
Coming straight to you from the Golden Gate Garage, this is the WrestleNews with Skyler Green.
Boys, girls, it's time for the news of the week, and it is important that we bring up the biggest things that are happening in professional wrestling. Sean, are you ready?
Oh, I'm ready, because we've got things that are so unbelievable they almost feel supernatural.
Because they may, in fact, be from outer space.
Go ahead, Sky.
Listen. Chris Jericho told a story recently on his Instagram about how he believes in aliens.
Which is fine, but wait till you hear exactly what he said, folks.
Right. It's because he was talking about this story that happened like a week ago or so ago. This is the dumbest thing. It was on the Metro. What a whistling thing. But basically, he was speaking to Howie Mandel's how he does stuff. And he talked about time displacement and how he was driving on a country road at 2 a.m. in the morning and he got home at 5 p.m. and he doesn't know what happened. He says he wasn't drinking, he wasn't doing drugs or anything. There's a big chunk of time missing. He should probably go to a hypnotist and see what happened. And he thinks he possibly was abducted by aliens.
See, that's the part that gets me above all of this, right? Like, I could understand, like, there's that Bob Lazar group with the UFOs and, like, the government, releasing documentation and let's all storm Area 51 that, like, 6 people went to. Like, I understand all of that. But why would you go to a hypnotist to find the answers out to that? Maybe a classified neurosurgeon might be able to tell Chris, who has been in the wrestling business for better part of 30 years and I'm sure is not concussion free, why you can't explain why you've lost 3 hours of time.
I mean, This is the sound of like a really bad B movie comedy.
Well, and if Ye wasn't having such a bigger mental breakdown, this would probably get more news. But which is the funniest part, because like Jericho's like, I'm ridiculous, and then like, of course, somebody has to outdo that. And do you think, Sky, that Chris Jericho is the Ye or Kanye West of professional wrestling?
No, because he's been acting. Well, Kanye's been acting weird for a while now. Now that I think about it, yes. Here's the problem, Sean, and I'm not even joking about this. There are so many contenders for the Ye.
You're not wrong. You're so not wrong. Recently though, you got to admit Chris Jericho is definitely doing his best.
I mean, I don't think Chris Jericho has attempted to try and get a sneaker deal with Skechers by walking into their office in downtown saying, hey, I got a meeting with the CEO.
Oh, Drake Younger might be more closer to Ye than Jericho.
Yeah, but here's the thing is, again, Ye went anti-Semitic remarks, goes to Skechers, which is run by a Jew.
Seriously, Kanye, get some help, bro. Get some help. This isn't healthy. It's been honestly sad to watch. Nobody's like, when you make Alex Jones look like a moderate human being, that is when you know you are going full blown, like, off the wall crazy. And Chris Jericho, you know what? Maybe they were in the same UFO. Maybe
Alex Jones, Kanye West, and Chris Jericho all got abducted by aliens.
And I could definitely see that being the case. I mean, they all can't explain certain periods of time in their lives for various reasons.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, we're making fun of all of these people because this is just Chris being absolutely outlandish as he's been for the past, really since he called himself Hulk Hogan in the beginning when AEW launched, where he's like, me joining AEW makes me the Hulk Hogan with WCW. And there are a lot more parallels now between Chris Jericho and Hulk Hogan than there's ever been.
But that's the thing is that, like, 2019, Jericho was at least consciously somewhat sane. It was since 2020 he's been doing this weird shit. Yeah. Well,
and Corny calling him out all the time on things that were very overtly true, and then him busting the belt buckle, and now his back wrinkles that he's got. Trust me, I saw those firsthand. Chris Jericho's got them back wrinkles. His back was smiling at me during that show.
That sounds gross.
It was gross. And Chris Jericho is gross. And it's just like, I want to have sympathy for Chris, but like,
why should we have sympathy for the rich, though?
Well, it's not even for the rich. It's just that I really don't like just how much Chris Jericho's level sank to accommodate AEW so that he could just play political games and milk Tony Khan for all that he was worth for his own selfish purposes, and I'm not surprised that Chris did that. Obviously, I'm not surprised that he did that, but considering that he was all about his whole attitude, or he said that he was helping people and was a catalyst for getting people over, name one person that Chris Jericho has helped since Fandango.
Chris Jericho.
There you go. And it's just more obvious now, and his segments are worse now than they've ever been, mostly because he has a say in them. And that, plus him being encouraged by the lowest common denominator of professional wrestling attitude and mentality, has just made this the worst possible form of Chris Jericho we could have asked for. And then he just says stupid stuff like this, and you just want to take away his fucking post toasties in the morning and just, he's like, no more vodka and water for you, Chris.
It takes a lot for me to go, you know what? Vince McMahon was right not to let this man pick his ideas when he was with WWE. We're talking about Vince McMahon here. and he has probably better ideas than Chris Jericho.
Well, I'll tell you something, Sky. You know, we always say how much Vince hurt people or helped people, but he also had a perception of knowing what not to put on his television when it wasn't coming from his brain. Like when he was starting to write for pretty much only himself, then it got worse. But as far as having people pitch ideas that are bad and knowingly bad, Vince knew when to say no, which is something that Tony Khan does not.
And speaking of Tony Khan, thank you for mentioning, we're going to go to the other major contender for the yay status in professional wrestling, and that is Mr. Khan himself.
Yeah, well, Tony Khan's not saying outlandishly outrageous shit. He's just taking a lot of very high activity drugs and jerking himself off in front of it and splooging all over the media.
Well, let's get to Tony Khan, because we need to get to Tony Khan. Because this interview, coming from The Ringer, basically, Tony Khan basically admits to something that we have suspected for a long time. And that is that he has been doing this idea of wrestling booking an e-show for a long time. Shall I read the quotes?
Please do.
So here's what Tony Khan had to say about his booking career. By the way, I love that I'm reading this off of PW Insider from Dave Schler. And you know what Dave Schler says in the opening before he does the quotes of Tony Khan?
I feel like I've heard it, but please say it for the people.
So Dave Schler from PW Insider, who is reporting on Tony Khan's comments, before he begins says, here's what Khan said about his booking career. I swear I am not making this up.
Yeah, that pretty much tells you all you need to know, doesn't it?
But here we go. In 1995, I started doing an e-wrestling show called Saturday Night Dynamite, and then it moved around over the next many years. At one point in time, it was on Monday night, but at one point it was also Wednesday Night Dynamite. Then I used that name Dynamite for many years, and it has always been a steady thing. I launched the promotion with a new territory, new wrestlers, and new stories every several years. I wanted to try something different. The one thing that was always the same was that the weekly show was always called Dynamite.
Wow. What foresight into the career he would have. But wait, there's more, folks.
Yep, and let's keep in mind for something. Tony Khan, at this point in 1995, is 13 years old. Sean, I'm sure you booked an e-wrestling show when you were 13, so did I.
While you're actually reading all of this, Sky, I'm looking through a 1-inch binder that, I kid you not, is full of not only roster pages, but television show cards, pay-per-view cards from 2003 all the way to 2014 when I started doing National Wrestling Entertainment, which was my show. I've got paper that I colored yellow and made belt designs that I slapped on top of my replica belts. You know, I'm kind of just flipping all through this here of all the old things. I didn't have anything called Dynamite. My shows were Force and Speed, and it's fascinating how I stopped doing this when I actually grew up. But yes, please, yes, we did all do this when we were 13 years old.
Right. But let me read the next point, and this point is the part where you realize the way Tony Khan thinks. It was probably around 2011 when I wanted to do more great wrestling matches every week. So in my fantasy wrestling league, I created a second show. Incredibly, that was Rampage. I actually had a third show that never came to fruition, but was kind of fun, and it was called Tuesday Night Tag Team Fights. I had these different shows, but Dynamite and Rampage were always the primary shows. I've done Dynamite since 1995 and Rampage since 2011.
Now let me ask you this, Sky. He says that these things were launched and founded, but to who? Who saw this? Who saw this booking between him and what? 2 other people that may have seen it, which I know that we're going to get to that quote in just a second, but it's not like he was booking to people at large. It's not like these were trademarked and copyrighted since 1995. Did the gall to say these shows have been going on for this long when they literally have only been going on this long in his mind and without the same people and without any of the prerequisites that involve what wrestlers do, including egos and not allowing people to do the job and injuries and all that sort of mess? How much of this did you really found and, oh, it never came to fruition? Yeah, because you didn't think it up. That's not something like you had it in plans that was
I don't know.
It's his language that bothers me here, because it makes it sound like he's had this successful company for 20 or 30 years when he hasn't. He hasn't even had a successful company for one full consecutive year in any of his endeavors.
I mean, the thing about it, let me just finish these quotes. So there's 2 more paragraphs, and then we'll get to dissecting this. But there's a point that's made here that we need to talk about. Tony Khan continues, in e-wrestling, you get ideas and try stuff out. I was a really young kid. I'm not saying it was impactful or anything, or that you can jump straight from that into the wrestling business, but it was definitely a fun way to get your reps in. So let me get this straight, Tony Khan. You believe that you can just get your G.I. Joe action figures and your WWF action figures or WWE action figures, put names on paper, pretend to wrestle with them, and say that that's how you get your reps in terms of a wrestling booker?
Well, let me ask you this, guy, because we've seen 3 years of Tony Khan's booking, right?
Yeah.
How many angles do you think were on this show, quote unquote, as he was booking it? Or was he just putting, that match would be fun to see, moves, winner, let's see, you know, was it all just like this by the book, this guy has this match, these guys have this match, then they fight each other, then we do it again, rinse, repeat. We just change who is in what positions with where, and that's all of a sudden supposed to teach you what angles are and how to get people mad and how to get revenge as a babyface and a heel. Like, do you understand any of that dynamic while you're doing this?
Much less talking with wrestlers, referees, announcers, how to conduct the entire show, how to book everything. One of the things I think we have to do is that we've been doing our Wrestling Fantasy Series, NWO versus ACPW, for, I believe, 3 years now, right?
Yes.
Now, of course, when we're doing booking with the idea that, yeah, we're booking, but we are putting matches and angles together. But the thing we're always kind of like saying is that we are doing this purely as an exercise to prove that we can be just as good a booker as Tony Khan or Vince McMahon at the time, until basically he died.
Well, in the professional wrestling sense, yes.
in the career sense. But the point I want to make again is that specifically with our series, we acknowledge that we are not full-time bookers. And if we were given the opportunity to book a wrestling show, we probably wouldn't be that good at it because we're doing it without the actual experience needed for it.
Yeah, it's hard enough to get a show together once a month, you know, and figure out who's going to go up against who, especially in some of those build shows where you got to like make the show entertaining, but a lot of it is just slogging through plot points and just getting, you know, you can have A to Z ready, but trying to figure out what B through Y are is difficult, and that's without having to deal with ego number one going, no, I'm not going to do the job, or I don't like the finish, or, you know, I'm not going to come back unless you pay me more. You know, there's so much more involved, and we are fully aware that would not, I mean, there's no shot in hell that an upstart company like ACPW would have been able to afford in the same fiscal year Brock Lesnar and CM Punk and Bryan Danielson and Jim Cornette and Randy Orton and Titus O'Neil and the myriad of other people we've hired. You know, we're giving a lot of concessions doing this fantasy booking, but we're more about engaging storytelling through professional wrestling, because we've both acknowledged that yes, we'll have certain plot points in the matches themselves, but that we're also leaving that to the wrestlers. You know, there's a lot that I think you and I, when what we do, in what we've always been honest in this podcast, which has been, we are fans. And we are smart fans, and we do what smart fans do, which is fantasy book, and that's fun to do. But that's just it. It's fun to do. But if you and I, but I still maintain, Sky, that if we had the opportunity to switch positions with Tony Khan and book one show of his, that you would do a better job than he would, and I would do a better job than he would, hands down.
Right, and here's the other thing too, and I just want to say this because this is the part with Tony Khan specifically that's like, this makes him a smart like the rest of us. There was a guy who passed away years later who was in the fantasy wrestling league I was in with my regular e-wrestling friend. And I remember him saying this so well. He said that we were writing for an audience of just each other, but in a way we were writing for 10,000 fans or 5,000 fans that were in the arenas of these imaginary shows. Somehow you can still tell when stuff is over or not over with the fans, which is funny because they're not real. But he was right. My other friend and I had never articulated it like that before, but he was right. That spoke to me.
Well, but the fans are also, the actual live in-person fans are speaking to you, Tony, and you seem not to give a flying fuck about what they have to say. So, but you're still going to sell them their merch and their favorite people's merch without actually showing them on television or doing anything in that respect to actually give them what they want. So
okay, can we just call out the bullshit of Tony Khan saying, I booked an imaginary show for an imaginary 10,000 fans, and I can tell I got over with those fans because they were cheering for me. Tony, I want to know what drug you're taking because I want some of that shit. Because those drugs must be better than whatever I can get over here on the West Coast.
I don't want that. I don't want that. I feel like I'm more coherent booking as it is. And you know, Sky, this has all gotten me thinking. You know, I think that what's fun about what Tony's done realistically is that he can book his fantasy booking in real life with real people with real injuries and stuff like that. But it's not very often that somebody else who is a smark would unveil their own fantasy league, you know, kind of like they did before, as far as their childhood league is concerned. So, Sky, I want to just pop in real quick a very, very small announcement segment. Roll it.
Announcements? Nani?
So, as we get towards the end of the year here, we're gonna do we got the Grapplies, we're gonna do a classic pay-per-view review, we might do a territory deep dive, we've got all that coming at the end of this year, of course ACBW and NWL, the finale of season 3, but next year, in the interest of having more than one smark revealing his true, you know, his fantasy booking from when he was a kid, I have got a folder and I'm going to do a series of live streams that details all of the booking that I did as a child. And I want you to be the judge. And I remember it all very distinctly, who did what and where and why. And I'll show you all the documentation. You'll get to see photos of it, which I'll post on as well. And you're going to see what child me did and see if it's doing as well as adult Tony Khan now. So I am officially challenging AEW and the 1995 Dynamite to 2003's NWE and will be the judge as to who did a better job. You want a vanity project? Well, you got one.
That's a very interesting announcement, and I'm looking forward to it. But again, Dave Schler from PW Insider ends his article by saying, again, I am not making this up. I wish I was.
Yeah, it's sad that that person has that much power in Tony Khan. That a man like that is the one who decided to run this thing. It's no wonder that he thought he could do it all himself. He's been booking for 30 years. How stupid were we, Sky? Oh, little did we know how much experience Tony had.
I know that you're joking, but I'm still getting a little pissed at you, not gonna lie.
Why is that?
Because it's so stupid.
It is stupid.
It's all stupid.
Well,
like, God damn it.
Well, stupid statements can come from anybody. And
No. Let's just stop for a second, okay? This whole thing with Tony Khan and booking. The only reason why he's getting the chance to book his show is because his daddy bought it for him, okay? This is all because he happens to be born the son of a billionaire. I didn't get $1 billion to start a wrestling company and sign 250 people to contracts I really shouldn't have, and sign all these people to amounts of money that I could never afford just because I want to fund my vanity project from when I was 13. Get the fuck out of here, Tony Khan.
yeah. At the very least, you know, try to get some people who can help you with the stuff that you don't know and admit that there's stuff you don't know. But, you know, at the same time, Sky, think about the people that are associated with them. They're really all cut from the same cloth. You know, Kenny Omega fits Tony Khan's vision of booking perfectly. As do the Young Bucks, as does Chris Jericho, because Chris Jericho is just that guy. He was on my show, too, as Chris Jericho. You'll get to see how I used him. Ha ha! Teaser. But in any case, it's just, to me, Tony is just, it gives childhood fantasy bookers a bad name. And I think that's why it's so personal for me that Tony shits the bed this hard and makes MJF say the stupid shit and then try to backtrack it with, oh, I said so much stuff, and then goes back to being a heel. Whether that was meant to be the plan the whole time or not, you know, it's just, you know that it was done purely to jack Tony off. The whole company was made for that reason.
I mean, let's get to one of the abused talents of Tony Khan's passions. And this man deserves so much better than what he's gotten from AEW. And that is the villain himself, William Regal. Well, think about this for a second, okay? Sean, if you had the opportunity to, if you were opening a wrestling company and you got the chance to have William Regal, what would you do with him?
William Regal would probably be, to me, kind of like what Arn Anderson is or was. Either as that authority, or like the face of the company in an authority capacity, to where I would not have to appear on the program, that all of that public relations stuff could be handled by a guy like William Regal.
And that would be his on-camera persona.
And then backstage as an agent or even head of talent relations. Because I bet
I think William Regal could probably be the booker, because he's been in wrestling business for so long, and he's done so many roles in the wrestling business for so long.
Potentially. I've never seen Regal as a booker. You know, I don't know what his thoughts would be. You know, not everybody who's been in the business for 30 years deserves to be a booker, Tony Khan. But
That is so good, not gonna lie.
You know, well, it's true. You know, are we gonna trust Glenn Gilbretti, Disco Inferno, to book?
Ooh.
You know, it's like,
but there's a difference between Disco Inferno and William Regal. But again, the point is that William Regal would be used infinitely better than the way he was used in AEW. He was brought in as a hot angle to get Daniel Bryan or Bryan Danielson or whatever the name is pronounced and Jon Moxley to work together. You're like, okay, William Regal as the lead of this stable could really be interesting, but you could also have him be the authority figure for a lawless company, because AEW is a lawless company. I don't say country, but it kind of is basically at this point.
Well, right now it's a country that's fragmenting into individual city-states, and those city-states are at war with each other. That started it all out with Athens and Sparta fighting each other. But in any case, it's just William Regal. Here's the thing that intrigues me about this. Tony Khan has said, I've bound all these people to contracts, and if they want to leave for WWE, well, I'd like to see them try. Then William Regal's like, yeah, I'm dipping, and it hasn't even been a year. And Tony Khan's just like, you sure? Okay. What does that say to people like Aleister Black or Malachi Black or whatever the fuck his name is? I feel like you just said that, Sky. But whoever the fuck these people's names are, what message does that send to him? What message does that send to people whose release requests have been denied? Because Tony Khan is afraid of those people moving, but somebody respected as William Regal, Tony's not going to say anything. What does that say about how Tony Khan is as somebody relating to the talent?
I don't know. This sends a message of incompetence. Like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, which Tony is never going to admit, but you can see in the way he looks,
obvious,
in the way he acts, that he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing.
It's obvious, and he's starting to lose control of the train, and the rails are starting to come off here. And I mean the backstage fights, the constant fights, the injuries, for God's sakes, all of the injuries, the rapidly declining ratings. Bridgeport only having 3,500 people in a 10,000 seat arena. Like, this is serious problems across the board, and I don't think Tony's handling it well, at all. And
of course he's not handling it well. This is Tony Khan we're talking about.
Yeah.
But don't worry, he's been booking Dynamite since 1995, and clearly he's been through some rough patches, but he'll know how to get through, right?
Well, what's fascinating, Sky, is that not to give anything away, but in my fantasy booking, I actually had 1 million people in television leave in 1 week, and it caused a decline of the company because I booked myself to win a Royal Rumble. Jeff Jarrett style. We'll get to that, folks. That's just a little teaser. So you want to talk about having real company problems and business problems being actually booked in a fantasy wrestling league. I got that. I was forced out of the company in 2013. You'll hear it all. So, and I doubt very seriously that Tony Khan would ever put that kind of thought into his fantasy booking. And that's the inherent difference.
This is the same guy who paid TNA or Impact to literally allow him to cut promos on their company airtime just because he wanted to.
Yeah, well, because he thought he was Vince McMahon in the USWA, and that's not what it was at all.
Right, and here's another thing too, though, with William Regal, is that he supposedly is leaving AEW and potentially going back to WWE by the new year.
Yeah, and God, how long has he been there? 6 months?
He got there in what, March?
Yeah. He has not been there for that long. And you'd think that Tony would have the balls to be like, no, you signed a contract for a year, you're living up to the year. That's what confuses me about this. Why would Regal have that much power to just walk away?
I don't know. There's not enough information out there to explain why William Regal is so special compared to all the other wrestlers.
I mean, we know because it's William Regal, but like if you're looking at it in a vacuum, like something's fishy. Something's very fishy about this situation with Regal leaving, right as he facilitates one of the hottest angles and coronations of AEW's most successful homegrown talent. It just doesn't make sense. What is wrong here? Because I smell something super fishy, and I'm really hoping it ain't coming from my jeans.
Gross.
Yeah. But speaking of MJF, if you don't mind me now making the leap over here, because I'd like to just, before we get into WWE, I have a quote from MJF I want to explore. So, recently, MJF was on Sam Roberts' podcast. For those of you who don't know Sam Roberts, he's a little curly-haired dweeb who's a big fan of wrestling, who I actually don't mind. He's a dweeb, but he's a wrestling dweeb who has a good podcast and asks good questions. So,
except for the part where he's been on those WWE pre-shows that we've nauseously hated.
Yeah, but those don't make anybody look good. Like, Jerry Lawler is better than any one of those panels will ever make him look. Booker T is just dialing it in as much as he can, and they're stuck with whatever nameless announcer is there. I think it's been Caleb Braxton lately, but in any case, MJF was talking to Sam Roberts, and the topic of Mount Rushmores of pro wrestling came up, which is before I get to this quote, what do you think about that concept? Everybody loves to make a Mount Rushmore of pro wrestling. Do you think that that's even something you can do with the amount of great wrestlers in different styles around the world over the years?
You'd have to segment it. You have to put qualifiers and distinctions. And are we talking about star power? Are we talking about wrestling ability?
Yeah.
Are we talking about drawing? Are we talking about gaits? Are we talking about general athletic ability? Are we talking promos? Are we talking the complete package? Are we talking US, Japan, Mexico, Europe? Because you have to go into so many different qualifiers. And the whole Mount Rushmore concept thing is so stupid. It's a weird number of just picking 4.
Yeah. But this is something that fans have loved to do, and they all are like, and again, everyone starts yelling at each other for that exact reason, because there's so much criteria you'd have to factor in to make something like that, and there's not enough. But
Notorious Booker Tony Khan has been doing the 4 pillars, and clearly because of his 28-year experience booking professional wrestling, he knows how to build a Mount Rushmore, right?
I'm sure. I'm not even sure he knows where Mount Rushmore is. But in any case,
neither does half of the American United States public.
Well, you're not wrong. But he's talking about Triple H is MJF, and he says that Triple H belongs on that Mount Rushmore, and Sam Roberts says why, and MJF says, well, first of all, he says look what he's become now, but then on why Triple H belongs even still, and this is the quote that we got from the podcast. If we were only talking about his wrestling career, I think he still winds up there. The Rock, Steve Austin, Kurt Angle, Edge, Bryan Danielson. There are way more names. Randy Orton, Batista, Ric Flair even at one point. He, made all those people. And I'm forgetting all of these people, and it's because he was so incredibly hated that when he went through that curtain and entered that ring, I'll put it this way. If Wheeler Yuta was standing across from him, they would chant Yuta's name. Now, who does that remind you of? Okay. I want your initial thoughts, and then I'm going to say why I brought this up and what I want to do with this particular quote.
MJF is blowing his potential future boss's dick, so, it's healing.
It's healing, but I want to kind of dissect this quote. Because his overall point is that Triple H was such a good heel that all of those people benefited from working with Triple H. I want to go down this list, and I want to see how many of those people you can actually make that statement for Triple H. Because Triple H worked with all those people, but let's talk about their most important moments. We'll start at the beginning. The Rock.
I think The Rock probably got over on his own.
I would say that Triple H benefited more from The Rock than The Rock benefited from Triple H. Yes, their feuds were great, but one of the biggest moments that Triple H's career ever had was when he was babyface and won that Intercontinental Championship match from The Rock. That made Triple H, realistically, that's what really got him to be valued as a bigger time player.
And I don't think that The Rock was going to be fine on his own. He didn't need to be involved in Triple H. The Rock was a bigger star and always had been.
And was drawing far more than Triple H. Now, Triple H, has always been the guy that worked with the guy that drew the money, and that's not a knock or a criticism at all. But if we're looking at it from a vacuum, then I think The Rock definitely more made Triple H than Triple H made The Rock. As for Steve Austin was already far established by the time he even crossed paths with Triple H on a major scale.
Yeah, again, it's the same thing. It's Austin was fine, and so was Rock. They were going to be okay, and Triple H he was the guy that was receiving more than he was getting.
Yeah. Kurt Angle.
But those were two layups.
Right. Kurt Angle. Maybe it's just me, but it almost feels like Angle had pretty much gotten over as a heel in that entire year that he didn't interact with Triple H and was just wrestling people like Benoit and Jericho for the majority of the year until he lost to Taz. In that first rookie year, I feel like Angle did more on his own to get it where he was by the time that he and Triple H crossed paths. And yeah, they were good when they did, but they didn't have nearly as much interaction, especially in the heel babyface dynamic that I think MJF was alluding to here.
Right. And again, Angle was a self-made man. He worked on himself and got himself over to the point where he could put over other people, or he could get over with other people.
Right.
Again, it's a situation where he was fine on his own. Triple H didn't help him that much.
Yep. Edge. Skylar, name me the moments when Triple H had any interaction with Edge, because I can only name two.
They were involved in that triple threat, but ironically, it got Jeff Hardy over.
Right, and that wasn't necessarily that wasn't getting Edge or making Edge. Edge, the first time I remember them having any major interaction was 2006 with Rated RKO and DX, and if it weren't for Triple H's quad injury, DX would have won that feud.
Right, and again, Edge at that point was also a self-made man,
and had already been world's champion and and was made by Cena, really, by being having that dynamic that those two had, and and then the other time that they interacted, Edge ended up getting the worst of the interaction because it was for the world title on SmackDown in 2008, and Triple H interrupted Edge's wedding, and Alicia Fox, WWE legend Alicia Fox, was there. And that was her debut, I think, was kissing Edge during Vicky's wedding day. And then they had a completely forgettable match that we've reviewed on this program. And so I don't see how them having such limited interaction, Triple H would have anything to do with Edge getting over.
Right. Now, here's another thing, too, though. Just because you mentioned Triple H and Rated RKO, show him with the picture of the midget. No, hold on just a minute. Hold on just a minute.
Now, that's a callback I wasn't expecting on this program, but I'm all for it.
Now, you could actually make the case for Randy Orton.
Well, we're getting to Randy Orton, but we've got a name before Randy Orton, and this one is the one that I'm most intrigued about talking about. Bryan Danielson. In some ways, I think you can make the case because of Triple H's analysis as a B-plus player and the way that they kind of helped kick him down and Danielson winning the belt and then helping Orton cash in and being that antagonist for Danielson to get over. But it is kind of revisionist history to look at it that way because if you recall, WWE basically weren't going to bother with Danielson until they felt like they had no choice. And then when they did it, they're like, oh yeah, that was the plan the whole time. We were planning that for 10 months. And the entire crowd was like, no, that's horse shit. You did it because you had no choice because people were going to boo your main event out of the building.
Well, it was that, but also the whole thing that it was supposed to be, remember this, folks. WrestleMania 30 was supposed to be Triple H versus CM Punk.
Yeah.
Until CM Punk walked out.
That's right. There were a lot of influences that changed the dynamic of that WrestleMania.
Right, and Bryan Danielson was originally going to wrestle Triple H, and then they were like, wait a minute, this main event is going to suck. So they had to do the concession of Triple H wrestling against Bryan Danielson. The winner goes on to make that match a triple threat, which Bryan Danielson beat Triple H, and then I think Bryan Danielson was going to be over on his own. It wasn't. Triple H was a plot device at best. He wasn't the central part of the story.
Right, and I do think that Danielson was pretty much over after Sheamus beat him in 18 seconds. And then it was WWE fumbling something very obvious in their hands until they finally caught the pass. But it was a long juggle before they got it. And granted, the match with Triple H and Danielson at WrestleMania was pretty good. I enjoyed it. And I think Danielson does have Triple H to thank in part, but he'd be just that. He's a bit player, not the reason that Danielson got what he got.
Right. But again, I think it's one of those things where Triple H did have an impact on Bryan Danielson's career. I mean, those two are synonymous with each other. I think you can make the case, but it's not the reason why Bryan Danielson got over.
Right.
Now, again, let's get to Randy Orton.
Now I'm conflicted about this because I think that inevitably the rivalries between Triple H and Orton are what made Orton feel so important, particularly their feud, as ridiculous as that home invasion was, but their feud in 2009. That made Orton. But I would say there were other things that helped Orton make Orton what he was, like Cactus Jack were before Triple H really became involved in helping him. Because there was a time that Triple H was not putting Randy Orton over at all. You know, Orton won the title from Benoit. Triple H immediately won it back. And then Orton could never beat Hunter at all. And it's from 2005 to 2006, and then 2007 finally did. And then 2009 is when Orton really started to make that stepping stone launch because of Hunter. So I think that one is definitely one where a case could be made, but it took a little while for that to be the truth.
True, but we also have to remember that Triple H spent a lot of time with Randy in Evolution, and it was one of those things where they were working together, and Triple H was teaching Randy how to be slow,
right,
and methodical, and slow and methodical.
And but also at the same time, but in the context of what MJF's argument is, he's saying that Orton was made because of Triple H's healing, but that's not really the case. Because Randy Orton got over, really seriously over, not when Triple H was a heel and Orton was babyface, but the other way around. This is another situation where babyface Triple H helped Orton cement his heeldom. I'm not saying that Triple H hasn't had an influence on the success of these people's careers, but in the context of what MJF is talking about, it doesn't fit.
Batista, obviously.
That's the only one of these entire names that does fit to me. Because Triple H was a bastard to Batista, and Batista did get over, and it's the only guy that Triple H really did put over as a heel significantly.
Well, there's that one. I was gonna CM Punk, obviously no.
Right. Well, and then the last one he mentions is Ric Flair. Now, I don't necessarily think this is true, albeit their feud in 2005 with Triple H as the heel and Flair winning the Intercontinental Championship was great. I'm not saying it wasn't. And Flair definitely did have a rejuvenation with Triple H, but realistically, Flair had already regained his confidence by aligning with Hunter, but it's not like Ric Flair was made because Triple H was so hated. It's that Triple H gained legitimacy by having a guy like Ric Flair by his side for that Evolution run.
Also, let's be talking about who we're talking about here. It's Ric Flair.
Yeah, exactly. Now, again, Triple H did help Flair gain his confidence back and have a resurgence in his career. I'm not saying he didn't. But
again, we're talking about Ric Flair here, okay?
Yeah. And also, let's not pretend that this isn't what it was. Triple H, the attitude at the time with Triple H, when in the context of basically all of these, is just how much Triple H took and didn't give, and that his runs were driving people away, and that the fans were losing interest, and he wasn't. We would consider him a draw now because if he came back and wrestled, more people would want to watch. But at the time, coming fresh off the Attitude Era and Triple H being really the guy the show was framed around, people were losing interest. And I'm not necessarily saying it's his fault, but you look to the champion, you look to the guy on top of the show that they're putting on top, and when you're looking at that kind of thing, and revisionist history would say that Triple H made all those people. In kayfabe, maybe he did, but realistically, when it came to business, most of those other people were either having more success ratings-wise, or the cause was already lost by the time Triple H got to it, that it was not going to really change anything as far as those guys' perception and who they were. So
we're not even giving it to the obvious cases of burials like Booker T or Kane.
Right.
We're talking about like people who maybe
or Steiner
a chance to benefit, or Scott Steiner.
Yeah.
There's a reason why it's called the Reign of Terror. Goldberg is another one.
Yeah, well, hindsight being what it was.
He got the belt back anyway, so
yeah.
The half one.
But
he buried Chris Jericho and took the undisputed title from him.
Yep. I mean, I understand what MJF is trying to say, but in the context of what he's saying and the people that he named, it's just not a true statement. It's just not true. And it's I understand respecting Triple H and his ability as a heel, because he definitely was a guy I despised as a child, especially after what he did to Shawn Michaels during that SummerSlam match, and then the feud that they had, and their whole feud where Triple H was tremendous. You want to talk about people that were made? Shawn Michaels' second career resurgence was made on Triple H's shoulders. That's true. It's just, I understand why MJF would want to believe that, but and why Triple H. I'm glad that there are things of Triple H that MJF can take from, but in the context of what MJF is talking about his healing being that big and that him being that hated, it's just not the case.
Now again, let's go ahead, because we only just covered the AEW section of the news. We still have the WWE section of the news. I'm going to try and be quick with this.
We've had a lot. We've missed a lot, guys. So it's time we catch up.
Fair enough. So we're going to go to WWE, and we're going to talk about a quick thing from Survivor Series War Games. Sean, do you want to know what the wrestling community thought of that show?
You mean the guys smarkier than us?
No, just the general wrestling community.
I thought it was pretty decently received, as far as at least from what I saw, is that most people.
Except for one match. I wonder what match
that might be.
involving a certain baddest woman on the planet and Shotzi Blackheart.
What a surprise.
But here's the thing, is that Ronda Rousey specifically made a request for that match, and that was to have the Brian Kendrick come back and help put together that match.
Why?
Because Brian Kendrick was the one that trained Ronda in her first initial run, and he's one of the trainers that she feels the most comfortable with.
Brian Kendrick also trained Eva Marie, so what's I'm not understanding. You know, actually, I might have just made more of a connection than I thought I might have. So it's him we have to blame for this horse shit. So now we know. We have a finger we can point, and a direction to point it, and it's the Brian Kendrick.
Spanky. You pointed at Spanky, who also did not get over because of Triple H.
Correct.
But no, this is an interesting thing, is that Ronda Rousey apparently has enough power to get someone like Brian Kendrick, who hasn't been seen in wrestling circles for a while because of anti-Semitic remarks that he made several years ago.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of that going around lately, and I don't understand it. Like, stop that shit. Everybody, stop that shit.
WWE is the land of where people can make stupid comments and do whatever they want.
That's true. That's true.
I consider the fact that Brian Kendrick was doing an agenting for Ronda Rousey's matches.
I mean, as much as I'd like to blame Brian Kendrick, I mean, I blame him for training Ronda the way that he did, but Ronda's also super lazy, and Shotzi drives a toy tank to the ring, and this is probably the one blemish on Triple H's mark so far. Not Brian Kendrick coming back, but more just after that first match with Liv, I was like, okay, you got me interested. But then everything that they've had Ronda Rousey do since has been awful. They've been putting her in garbage matches that have gone on longer than 2.5 minutes, which is what most of these matches against these women should be. And I don't understand it. And it's like as if Brian Kendrick's going to help that situation any.
May I make a case, an explanation for what Triple H is trying to do?
Go for it.
He realizes that Ronda Rousey is not going to be very good, so he's going to try and get as much money as he can out of that cow until he can get some of his better women's wrestlers back.
Well, that doesn't mean he has to put them in dog shit matches with dog shit wrestlers.
The problem is that the women's roster for WWE is limited. And again, we've said it before, it's going to take time to build up the women's division for WWE. Probably at least the next 2 or 3 years are going to be crucial for the development of the future of women's wrestling.
True.
But again, the crop that he has right now to work with is very shallow, and there isn't a lot of good baby faces that they can match up against Ronda Rousey.
Well, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you on that. And I know that they would maybe want to save somebody like Becky Lynch for a bigger show. You know, I get this weird feeling we're going to get Charlotte and Ronda again.
I feel like we were going to get Becky and Ronda or Charlotte and Ronda.
I would, if they put, for the women's matches this year, if they put Bianca and Charlotte on one, and they put Becky and Ronda on the other, you might have something there. I just want people like Shotzi Blackheart not in the equation at all. Because it's really making it hard for me to go, yeah, Triple H has got a handle on the women's division. And again, I'm trying not to be critical because all of these changes Triple H wants to do take time, and he's even admitted as such. So I'm giving you benefit of the doubt. If it takes the Brian Kendrick to get Ronda Rousey to perform 10% more than the 15 she's giving, great. I guess. I don't know.
And by the way, to be clear, Brian Kendrick is not back on an official basis with WWE. It's just a one-time thing, apparently, to see if he could actually do anything, which... I
mean, you're giving a man a pile of turds and telling them to paint a rainbow on a canvas. I mean, what do you want the guy to do? He could have laid out Savage Steamboat and would still have to deal with the execution of Ronda Rousey and Shotzi.
Again,
how is that a fair metric to judge the man on?
It's not. It's definitely not, but it is what it is. Now, let's go on to the big time main eventers, because these are the people that actually matter. Have you heard about the heat involving Kevin Owens and Roman Reigns at Survivor Series War Games?
I've seen some heres and theres. I've seen some whispers, and I don't know whether it's sustained heat. I don't know whether it's still going on or whether they've kind of just resolved it now and they're just kind of changing potential plans for the next couple of months. But I heard that Owens was potentially going to work with Roman, but now that's no longer in the cards.
Well, let's go ahead and get into it. Apparently, during a spot involving Roman and Kevin Owens slapped Roman Reigns a little too hard, and it may have ruptured Roman's eardrum, according to what Roman says. This is all by the way from Dave Meltzer.
Okay. So take that for what it's worth.
But yeah, basically, it was one of those situations where Kevin Owens probably just slapped Roman too hard, which when you could see it when you were watching that match, you could see the slap and you could see Roman reacting because he was not prepared for it.
Yeah. And this might just be a thing where you have words and then you resolve it, and I'm sure that Owens might be getting a receipt at some point for it, but I could see that shit kind of happens. It's not ballet. I can understand Roman being upset with it, but
right. And to be clear, there is not expected to be any lingering heat. It's one of those things where they're both expected to keep professional and continue to work together because there's too much money to be involved. Which the reason why is because those two are potentially going to be wrestling at the Rumble.
Well, and if they do, expect that match to be pretty snug.
Oh yeah. But you want to know Roman Reigns' continued plans for WrestleMania season?
I've heard whispers.
Yep. The first whisper is that Elimination Chamber in Montreal will be headlined by a Roman Reigns Sami Zayn match.
Which I'd be in for if I didn't already know the Usos are going to be the reason that he wins. But it's going to be good storytelling regardless, so I'm not going to knock it.
Right. Of course, the implied implication is that Roman Reigns will at some point betray Sami Zayn.
Oh, right, naturally, which is coming. It's just they haven't done it yet.
Yep. But supposedly this will lead to Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn coming together as friends and challenging the Usos for the Tag Team Championships and winning the titles from them. Sean?
I mean...
Tell me something.
What's that?
Tell me something. Does that sound like something I did?
I mean, I don't want to be the one who's saying that Triple H... I mean, well, let's be fair. I think Triple H just inherited the steal from Skylar attitude from Vince McMahon. Realistically, I mean, Vince was doing it, so why wouldn't Triple H do it? Triple H is being less discreet about it. I mean, right as you're finishing up a World Cup, he's like, I'm going to do a World Cup. So,
right, and he's gonna do the best friends coming together to win the tag team championship. I just did that storyline.
Yeah. Oh, right, with AJ and Daniels, of course.
No, DIY.
Well, and DIY as well. Well, I'm surprised.
The Usos.
Yeah.
He's literally taking the story right from me.
Well, kind of. Although you didn't get at least he didn't get the lob of having the descent between the two of them and slowly rehabbing the relationship the way that you did, as far as like them kind of still having to team with each other and the I don't trust you and all that stuff. So we'll see if he actually does that to a T. But I think no matter what, Sky, I think you're going to come out with the better of that situation. But the thing is that I like about this, though, is that all of these things, while some people might decry them for being predictable, predictability isn't a bad thing if the storyline is solid. You know,
Right,
swerves for the sake of swerves are no fun.
Right, because we want good storytelling, we want good promos, and we want good wrestling action.
Right.
If it's predictable, yeah, but honestly, who cares at this point?
Well, and we don't now the excitement gets to be, how are they going to do it? Like, we know that Roman's going to turn on Sami, but how? And in what context? And that's where it becomes more exciting. It's like, I don't mind knowing the end result, because then I'm more excited about the steps to get there. And
Yep. And well, true. Continue.
No, and well, that's pretty much what I had. It's like that. That's just it's exciting for that, and that's something I've learned from the fantasy booking is that you can get excited about the way to get there. Yeah, you may know the end result, and sure, you might not necessarily have that glistening twinkle in the eye like you did as a kid, not knowing the result. But I think there is a certain level of enjoyment and entertainment out of watching the story develop from point A to Z, and then getting the satisfaction of that point Z.
And here's the thing too, is that anything can be predictable as long as you make it exciting predictable or entertaining predictable. Now, there is one thing with WrestleMania that's still up in the air, and that is whether or not Roman Reigns will be wrestling The Rock.
Well, it's been discussed from what I've seen about The Rock winning the Rumble, but Sky, do you think there is any chance The Rock doesn't get booed by at least half of the audience if he does?
It depends on how good of a heel Roman Reigns is.
Yeah, but even still, I mean, but, you know, what happens if Cody comes back in that same Rumble and doesn't win?
Well, here's the thing, is that if you have The Rock wrestle against Roman Reigns and the fans cheer for Roman, then what you can do afterwards is say, Hollywood acknowledged me. And you can turn Roman Reigns somewhat babyface or heel depending on the situation. But the whole thing is that you can play it off because Roman's so good that he can do that.
It's the thing is, it's like, but then, you know, the closer we've gotten to this whole Rock versus Roman thing, like, the less I like it, the less I want it, because we're kind of talking about predictability, right? And how, like, sometimes that's worth it, but, like, what are the possible outcomes of that matchup? The Rock wins the belt, which people would not like, the same way they didn't like it with somebody like CM Punk losing the belt to The Rock, because of what that signifies about the business. And that would show a lot of people that really WWE is going to WWE. And they're still going to choose the larger talent over the name of people who they could put over with something like beating Roman Reigns' massive run. Or you have Roman Reigns retain again and continue this run. But at what point are people just going to be tired of watching him win? Like, you've got to pay this off eventually. And it's starting to get to the point of it being close to wearing out its welcome. If it weren't for this Sami Zayn storyline, I feel like it would have already.
Yeah, you're probably right. The other thing, too, though, is that you could also have a situation where The Rock helps someone like Cody Rhodes win the belt.
True. Which is something that I wouldn't mind. Or, God, you know.
It probably would be the best case scenario now that I'm thinking about it.
Or could you imagine if you'll indulge me here, that somehow through the use of modern medical technology, The Rock ends up helping in the main event of WrestleMania CM Punk beat Roman Reigns?
Oh, God.
Could you imagine? I mean, that really would be a full circle way to kind of close out all of those little lingering bits of WWE, you know. But let's not get too excited about something that almost guaranteed is not going to happen. But there's
well, what we can do is we can talk about The Rock a little bit more and about his name.
Well, that's right, because there's something that has been synonymous with pro wrestling for quite some time. They've been using it for a long time, whether real names or pseudonyms. But what goes into, and this is our topic today, what goes into a good wrestling nickname? And I think there's a number of factors that go into something catching. Sometimes, and we've seen this a few times, the name or the personality don't match, or two people have the same nickname and it fits one over the other, or someone tries to don a new nickname and it doesn't fit so much that they end up getting COVID and leaving the company and then getting fat and winning the AEW tag titles.
Yeah.
Bearcat Lee.
Ooh. I think the thing about wrestling nicknames is kind of like anything else in professional wrestling. It depends on the person. It depends on the name. How cool is it? And can you get it over?
Right. And a lot of that has to do with, I think alliteration really helps. You know, Hitman Hart sounds pretty good. You know, there's, you know, I don't know how Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels ended up being so good for him, but just the way, again, it's how can you get it over? It fit Shawn's weird personality, which was mostly Soma's, but it worked.
But the other thing too is that because everyone with a nickname, there has to be a story behind it. Why was Shawn Michaels the Heartbreak Kid? Because he kicked Marty Jannetty, despite the fact that Marty was a coward and tried to jump through the windowsill.
That's right. That's how it happened. Ask Bobby, the Brain, who was one of the smartest people in professional wrestling. You know, he was the mastermind behind major groups and title wins and things. And again, Bobby the Brain. Alliteration really helps.
Right, but it's also self-proclaimed. Like, he believed that he was the smartest man in wrestling. And you can make the argument that he was.
Yeah.
Again, with Heartbreak Kid, he broke the hearts. That's why the hearts of millions. That's why he's the Heartbreak Kid.
Yep. I mean, I feel like the dead man kind of goes without saying.
Right. Even something like The Rock with Dwayne Johnson. It sounds stupid, but because of the way that he got it over,
yeah,
he should not have been able to get it over, but he did.
Yeah, and he totally did. And that's, you know, same thing with The Rock, Don Morocco, talking about people with similar names, but Morocco got it over in a completely different way. You know, and that's what's so fantastically interesting about pro wrestling, is that you can have two guys with the same nickname and have two completely different personalities, or have a similar kind of personality, as in Nature Boy Buddy Rogers and Nature Boy Ric Flair.
Right. Again, everything with nicknames in wrestling is that there's a story behind it. It helps accentuate a wrestler and helps make the wrestler more interesting, make the gimmick more interesting, make the person a bigger draw.
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, again, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You know, and
Shorty G.
Shorty G. Yeah. That was without our master, without the two of us, you know, that wouldn't work. You know,
and even then I still hate it.
Yeah. And we still put it over, but even something like Bay Area Brawler, alliteration really helps. You know, I'm not trying to just get it back to just grammar, but like something aesthetically pleasing to the ears that will help people remember it. You know, it's weird how the mind works like that, but it is like,
it has to roll off the tongue and be catchy, because that's how you get the people thinking about it. Like The Rock rolls off the tongue so well.
Jake the Snake, you know, rhyming helps.
Yep. Puns work sometimes.
Puns work sometimes, but, you know, at the same time, it's like you said, Sky, a lot of it really just depends on the personality of the guy, you know, and that's part of the thing. You know, remember Hollywood Hulk Hogan, and then, you know, they called him kind of Hollywood Rock, but, you know, they kind of had a similar style, but again, alliteration, Hollywood Hogan, but a part of it is personality. You know,
right,
and when
like the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase.
Yeah, and that wasn't just about the dollar bills on his jacket, which, you know, and that was, you know, great for him, and what he was able to turn that into. And part of that is just gimmick and knowing, you know, how to make the gimmick work. But, you know, the other part of that is sometimes it's done by accident, you know, whether, you know, Triple H just saying, like, everyone wants to know they know how to play the game. Well, I am the game. And that just happened to catch. You know, and that and sometimes it's like that. You know, it's the same thing as slogans. You know, and I feel like it happens a lot of time by accident, but a lot of times I think the fans also facilitate it too. And it's weird how they originate, but it works for some. And the ones that are iconic are really iconic. Stone Cold Steve Austin. But the ones that are...
You get the forgettable ones.
Yeah.
Again, Minchin Mia Yim.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, the word Minchin in Korean is crazy, because crazy is how you get women over.
Right. Don't forget, there are 2 rules of getting over for women. Scream and...
Scream and act crazy.
Yeah, that's it. Scream and be somewhat attractive. That's been that's how women's wrestling has been booked, with the exception of the ones who are really taking it seriously, that you can tell they're investing in. That's what they do with 3/4 of the other people that are there. Look at Ruby Cross, Liv Morgan. We can name a bajillion of them. Nikki Cross.
Right. It can even work for the same person. Like Becky Lynch's The Man is better than Big Time Bex.
Yeah.
Because again, The Man rolls off so well.
Right. And then also, yeah, and it's and another one that's kind of someone that the personality made it their own, Dr. Britt Baker, DMD.
Right. Even though it's a little bit of a mouthful, but it works.
It is, because she made it work. You know, that's the whole thing. Is like, she was able to make it work. You know, when you've got the right person, if they're bound to get a nickname, they'll get one. But they're not giving themselves those nicknames. They'll earn those nicknames for one reason or another. Like,
oh yeah, and again, like our person that's featured in our match of the week, the big cat, Ernie Ladd.
Yes, and I don't know what it is with cats in professional wrestling. Ernest the Cat Miller, even though his whole thing was like, he's like smooth as a cat, like he's the James Brown. So I didn't really quite understand. Big Cat Ernie Ladd, that was pretty obvious, because that dude's monstrous. You know, man, that dude's a big...
But he can move around so quick and agilely like a cat.
Yeah, that man's a big cat, I'll tell you right there. And that's, there's Big Cat Ernie Ladd, and then Bearcat Lee. But then there's Bearcat Wright, who was fine. Sometimes it's just weird how some people will get the exact same deal. One will make it work, and the other, it'll ruin their career. But that's the interesting thing with nicknames.
Good, bad, or ugly, just like anything else in professional wrestling, they can make a career or destroy it.
That's right. But what really makes a person's career is not only their personality, but how well they can get over an environment that may not necessarily be their own, but can definitely engage people. And when you've got 2 guys that are at the top of their game at around the same time in a matchup that is really full of not only just legitimacy, but also very invested fans, you get our match of the week this week. Roll it.
What time is it? It's the fight, it's the brawl, it's the match of the week. It's tonight, watch along with the son of a beat. It's 1 fall, the down for the 1, 2, and 3. So don't stall, hang on to the edge of your seat. We got a punch and a flip and a powerbomb too. All the moves and the stars are all under review. See the baby face cheered and the heels get heat. This is wrestling at its peak. It's the match of the week.
That's right, folks. It is our match of the week, featuring 2 legends. It is March 21st, 1974, the National Wrestling Federation at the Cleveland Arena in Cleveland, Ohio, a 2 out of 3 falls match between Ernie Ladd and the champion, Antonio Inoki. Sean, what do you think of this classic match?
Well, I got a little confused at the end regarding what the ruling was. So that did throw me off, and I had to kind of look up what the official ruling was, because all the commentary was in Japanese, so I only got, I kind of just had to infer from what I was seeing. But the match itself was quite good. I very much enjoyed it. Slow, definitely pace for pace, but I really enjoyed it. It really, they built up to a fever pitch very well, to the point where fans were throwing trash into the ring when Inoki, the clear heel, ended up retaining the belt regardless, because this was for the NWF Heavyweight Championship.
Yep. Now, do you know anything about the NWF?
No, actually, I only know about NWE, but you're all going to learn about that. So I'm the only one who knows about NWE right now.
Okay, so the NWF was a promotion. It was a territory that ran from 1970 to 1974. So actually, this company was not around for a long time.
Yeah, it didn't look like they had many people in the building for this match either.
Although it was surprisingly loud. But this was based in Buffalo, New York, so it was kind of like tri-Atlantic area, I guess, if you want to call it that.
That's
I'm pretty sure
very peculiar.
Yeah, but it was run by Pedro Martinez.
Martinez, not Morales.
Yeah, Pedro Martinez.
Right, because those are two different people, both of whom in the wrestling business, but Martinez was more promoter, where Pedro was more just WWF/WWF ethnic babyface that drew buckets of money.
Right. And he was working together with Johnny Powers, and they were running it in its first run from 1970 to 1974. Surprisingly, the company folded in 74. Inoki, who was the champion for most of the time at the company, took the belt with him to New Japan and used it in New Japan until 1981 when they unified the titles. And then NWF was revived in 1986 by Robert Raskin, who turned it into Continental Wrestling Alliance.
Yeah, which is why you mean Continental Wrestling, which was meaning like the Bob Armstrong Continental Wrestling? No, that had to be like in that can't be right.
It was a different Continental.
Yeah, okay. I was like, that cannot be the same. Okay, yeah, I was like that. Yeah, no, CWA was something else, but it didn't last very long as that iteration either, did it?
It lasted from 1986 to 1994. Surprisingly, that show was one that was revolutionary at the time because it had a women's division that it tried to focus on, and it hired a certain young man by the name of Paul Heyman to do color commentary.
Ah, from humble beginnings.
Yep. But anyways, the point, though, is that let's go back to the 1974 edition. Antonio Inoki is the champion for most of the company's time, and he's gone up against a lot of people, but Ernie Ladd is clearly the biggest one. Now, Sean, do you want to know the reason why I picked this match of the week?
Well, because you didn't really care for... Because the Inoki Flair match was so interesting, but had a very weird text to it that you wanted to get Inoki... A better Inoki match, and I had intrigued you about Ernie Ladd during our deep dive.
Well, the thing is that when I was looking at Antonio Inoki, I'm like, the match with Flair was good, but that was Inoki towards the end of his career in the limelight. And I feel like in order to get a good idea of what Inoki could do, we had to go back to his prime.
Which would be right around this time.
Yeah, I mean, look at those sideburns, man.
Yeah, the sideburns and those thighs. Quad game was strong in this match.
Yep. Nothing says 70s like those sideburns. I bet even anything Antonio Inoki probably wore like a fur jacket and had a pimp's cane walking around when he was not wrestling.
Maybe. I don't know. I'm sure he did at least one point in his career.
Yeah. But again, this is one of those things where this was a really interesting match of two styles that surprisingly held up together.
Well, I think that they both broke this down and kept it simple, which was, I think, A, very smart, but B, also very much showcased not only each other's athleticism, but they really were able to establish, without doing anything ill-intentioned, who to cheer and who to boo. And
right.
That's rare. That you can do that and still establish that without really doing any sort of heel tactics or cheating.
Right, and it's not even necessarily that Inoki is the smaller man here. Like, Inoki is, what, 6'4", 6'5"? Ernie Ladd being 6'9", and being the bigger guy, you would initially think to root for him, right?
Well, I think, and also there's probably a bunch of mainstays in NWF at this point who are sick of Inoki being champion, which I'm sure had to had part to do with it. You know,
and you would be correct.
With the fact that Ernie was really cheered throughout most of this, and they sold it as much. You know, I mean, Ernie did some shining at the beginning and was, you know, really. One of the things I noticed is that every time they locked up, Ernie would be the one to bring Inoki to the ropes, clearly demonstrating that he had the power advantage over Inoki. You know, and it's small stuff like that I really enjoy, the subtleties of wrestling that we don't get nowadays because everything's so fucking fast.
Right, and this is one of those things with the NWF is that not much of the tape survived, but I'm glad this tape survived because it's pretty good quality. You can see the little things they're doing in the wrestling holds. You can tell Inoki is very, very well trained in the grappling, very tight, very snug submission-based moves, and he had Ernie Ladd on the ground for most of the match.
Yeah, well, both of them did. I mean, one of the early things that impressed me was like the head scissors, right? And also, I don't know who the name of this referee is, but this dude needs a goddamn medal. He was on it all matchup. He, from start to finish, he was really doing a great job of checking for shoulders. You know, when Ernie was in that, like that leg entrapment that Inoki had, and Ernie Ladd was going to go back with a closed fist punch, which is illegal, and the referee blocked him from doing it. Said, you can't hit him with a closed fist punch. He was like, no, you can't do it. You're going to get disqualified. So then he had to open up the fist and kind of get more into palm strikes, which they gave back to each other. The refereeing, the officiating in pro wrestling is so crucial that when you have someone knocking it out of the park this strong, it shows.
Right, because he's very much doing it as a combat sport referee. He's not just being an entertainer.
Right, checking the shoulders constantly. Loved that. You know,
and enforcing the rules and not being afraid to enforce the rules, because the referee is a smaller guy compared to the two wrestlers.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of power to stop Ernie Ladd from throwing those punches.
Yeah, and definitely to do that and to hold out, and knowing that it was for a title match and Ernie had to be careful, and yeah, it was a best of 3, but you don't want to get yourself disqualified in the first round.
Right. And the other thing too about this match, and we've made comment about this with the modern wrestling style, is that this match was clunky, but it looked like a struggle. It looked like these two were fighting with each other. It wasn't a situation of, oh, we were planning on doing a spot, but it didn't work.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Yeah, it definitely was more in the context of, I'm just having a hard time getting you down. Like, I'm trying to get you down. You know, I didn't write a ton of things on this because it was just so good. One of the things I really liked was when Inoki was trying to snapmare Ernie Ladd and Ernie was blocking it, and he kept blocking it. And the third time, finally, Inoki used all of his body weight and, like, dove, basically. And that's the one that got Ernie over. And I loved that. That was so nice. You know, just a small little torquing angle from Inoki is enough to finally get the big man down.
Right, and it was not a very pretty snapmare, but it was just enough to get him down to the ground, which is what Inoki wanted to do.
Yeah.
Which is very smart because he's the smaller wrestler. The way you take down a bigger wrestler is you keep him on the ground, you focus on him, you submission him. You don't let him be up and let him get offense.
Yep, he eliminated the vertical base. He was working on the legs to some degree, you know, definitely cutting off the oxygen later on, and we'll talk about that in a second. But then we get that big double arm suplex, and Ernie Ladd kicks out at 1. Oh, that was great. And I was like, oh, man. And that was perfect because that made, you know, that was a big move considering that it was really just headlocks and snapmares and submissions pretty much throughout. You get a big suplex, and it's a 1 count. And that put over Ernie so well as somebody so imposing to be, you know, intimidated by. And Inoki's not a small dude.
No, again, we said it. Antonio Inoki is 6'5". He's a pretty built guy.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Ernie Ladd, 6'9", towers over him. But you want to know? Let's go back to the referee for a second. Inoki has, like, this head scissor submission on Ernie Ladd's head. The referee does the raising of the arms. But rather than just count it, he starts doing a pin count.
Yeah, that was an interesting rule that I didn't really, you know, they did that in the sitting him down. I didn't know that that was something that anyone had done, where you do that and then you go for the pin and then it woke him up. I do really like the fact that Ernie Ladd was starting to get some fire, but then Inoki just wrenched that head scissors that much tighter, and it brought Ernie Ladd back down to that spot. And then the second time he did it, he really started to get that comeback energy. You don't see people do that twice, and that was so different that I really was taken by it.
Right, and then Ernie Ladd is still stuck trying to lift Antonio Inoki, but he's been in that submission for so long. But just finally on the third try, lifts him up and does a buckle bomb and collapses because he's so tired.
Yeah, and we should also just mention too that Inoki's drop kick is just a thing of beauty. Like, part of what I like about it is just like his launch. Right, when he initially gets off the ground, he definitely like bends his knees and really like vaults his legs up, and just the extension, it's just so good.
It very much like the best person I've ever seen do a drop kick is Randy Orton, because I love Randy Orton's drop kick.
Yeah.
But Inoki's a close second.
Yeah, and because it's two different style of drop kicks, but the drop kicks they throw are quite fun. I like Bobby Eaton's drop kick too. For that kind of meat and potatoes style that he had. And then we get a double count out to the end of the first fall. Now,
which is peculiar, but again, Antonio Inoki has done so much at this point, he starts having trash thrown at him.
Yeah. And here's the interesting thing about this is I kind of thought the way that Ernie Ladd thought in this matchup, which is why I think I, like Ernie Ladd, was confused at the end of the match when Inoki left with the belt. But what I thought had happened here is that they both get counted out, and instead of none of them getting any points, that they would both get a point, and then the second match would be the match, right? And that would be what decided it. Is like you both got a point, so now match 2 is now technically match 3 because it's the first of 2 wins. That's not how this was formatted.
Nope. It was interesting in the way it was formatted.
Yeah, so the first match is just a draw. So now they're going to the second one, and now they're going to for sure have a third one. But it also took 15 solid minutes to get to this point.
Yeah, and they were clearly exhausted. They're sweating a lot. They're putting in the effort and making it a struggle, because it is a struggle.
Yeah. Yeah, and you could tell I loved, like, throughout the whole match just how much of a healthy respect the two had for each other.
Right. And again, this was part of a series of matches between Inoki and Ernie Ladd. They've wrestled with each other a lot over the years. So there's a lot of comfortable chemistry with these two.
Yeah. And another little subtlety I really liked is when Ernie Ladd has the body. Again, it was a big day for quads on this day. Ernie Ladd's got a body scissors on Inoki, and Inoki just rotates Ernie Ladd so that Ernie's foot gets on the rope, and he has to get forced to break the hold. That is brilliant subtlety. But I love that.
Again, it's the little things that he does. When Ernie Ladd is doing the power slams, he gets 2 of them. Inoki rolls them up, and again, the transitions are just smooth and flawless.
Smooth, not necessarily pretty, but smooth. It's still, like you said, it's clunky like a struggle, but still smooth. And then we get that bow and arrow.
That was my favorite submission that Inoki did all night. He grabs the leg of Ernie Ladd, then grabs the head, and puts his feet into the back, and the fans are booing him. They're throwing trash. This was beautiful.
Yeah, and it was a pretty intense bow and arrow. I mean, Ernie looked like he was in a bad way, and then he puts his feet on his back. And as I'm a sucker for a good bow and arrow that doesn't involve flipping them up on their knees. A good bow and arrow like this, you don't see it very often. I'm a huge fan of this. Huge fan of that.
And then Ernie Ladd gets a couple of boots, and again, the head scissors take down.
Yep.
But again, Ernie Ladd is so big and powerful, it takes everything from Inoki just to chop him or whatever, just to get him down.
Yeah. And I do like the fact that way earlier in the match, Ernie Ladd actually sold Inoki's chops very well. That they, really did damage to him and like kind of rocked him back a bit. But these big boots, holy God. They were big. And I love the fact that it was 2 big boots by the big cat. And it was that slight, just split-second kick out, because Inoki's not going to just lay there for a count of 3. That ain't happening. But the split-second kick out right after the count of 3, Ernie has the belt and tries to leave, thinking he's won it like I did, and nearly gets counted out for the 3rd fall, and then he's like, oh, snap, we're actually having another match here.
No, actually, that's what happened, is that Ernie Ladd thought he won, and because of the whole draw in the first place, and got the belt, and Inoki got pissed at him about it, and he's like, no, I kicked out, but no, I didn't, because it was the Hulk Hogan kick out thing.
Yes, it was.
But they were like, no, it was a draw in the first one, you didn't win. He got counted out, actually. You can hear the referee count to 10, and he got counted out.
No, it was a count to 20. The referee was counting to 20. He got to like 19, and Inoki hit him and actually threw him in at 19 because Inoki needed to make his comeback of doing all the big moves, and then that whatever that top rope fiasco was.
It was supposed to be a knee to the face, but he missed and just hit him in the stomach.
It was literally just like, let me just stumble off the top rope, and what I hit with you, I hit with you.
But again, it's one of those things where Inoki, he got really tired, but again, so much heat because he was cheating. And Ernie Ladd didn't have a chance to get back into the ring until Inoki started attacking him, and he was being vicious. These back body drops, oof.
Yeah, and then, and then he gets a 3 on Ernie Ladd, and then it's like, all right, well, we've got through all 3 matches here, and it was a draw, and then Ernie won 1, and then Inoki won 1, so I guess the answer is it's still a draw, so Inoki's still champion, and that's when the fans really started throwing trash. And this, to me, isn't like get heat kind of trash. This is the we're done with this kind of heat. As evidenced by the company no longer existing shortly thereafter.
I mean, maybe that's the reason. Maybe it was good heat, maybe it was bad heat, but either way, it was heat.
It was heat, and while I was confused, and also Ernie Ladd was confused, I don't hate this idea of it being a draw. I mean, draws are great in wrestling when you use them right. I'm all for draws. I've used quite a few of them. But I feel like with this moment and with this the way it was, I don't see how you couldn't have just given Ernie the run here, with that. But, I feel like we didn't quite give enough credit to Inoki's politicking when we reviewed his career. Because he could politic with the best of them. Hence why he had the Hulk Hogan kick out and still left with the belt.
I mean, to be honest, we really should have been saying that Antonio Inoki was the Hulk Hogan of Japan, because he really was.
In a lot of ways, he very much was. Although I would say Inoki was a far better worker on the whole than Hulk Hogan. But also, people didn't want to see Hulk Hogan work. They wanted to see Hulk be Hulk. So...
Right.
There is a difference.
But again, Hulk Hogan never had the scientific magic that Inoki does.
Right? Well, and also, the thing is, Ernie Ladd would probably respect Antonio Inoki, but he'd see Hulk Hogan working and go, Hulk Hogan, you're stealing from the people. You're stealing from World Wrestling Federation. You are, brother. But Hulk Hogan, you big fat piece of shit. And
I'm going to come in there and I'm going to kick your ass and I'm going to take the title for the people.
Oh,
because you've messed with them one too many times.
I love Ernie Ladd. I really do. And I always loved his promos and that very unique stilted voice that he had. And it is really iconic. And now let's talk about him. Big Cat Ernie Ladd, you're the one who wanted to dig into this, and I immediately said yes. So why don't you lead us off and tell us a little bit about Ernie Ladd?
Well, here's the thing, is that Ernie Ladd, for all of his wrestling stuff, was arguably an even better football player and was probably the first successful football player transition to wrestling that there has been.
Yeah. Yeah, and he has a hell of a football career, and I'm in a second I'm sure you're going to list off all of his football accomplishments, but that was a big part of what helped wrestling really continue to remain or feel legitimate, is that you got guys that were not only wrestling stars, but then you've got sports athletes, and Ernie Ladd took to professional wrestling very smoothly.
Yep. So Ernie Ladd was a professional football player. He played defense, and he was a lineman, played number 77. He played at Gambling State. And then here's the interesting thing, is that in 1961, he gets drafted to the NFL draft by the Chicago Bears in the 4th round. And when the 15th pick overall in the 1961 AFL draft by the AFL San Diego Chargers.
That's awkward. This was pre-64 merger, by the way. Or 66, whichever one it was. It was one of those 2 years when the AFL and the NFL finally merged and the Super Bowl era was born.
Right, but that's the interesting thing, is that he was drafted in both drafts by the Chicago Bears and the San Diego Chargers. Ultimately, he chose to go to the Chargers. Get this, okay? Listen to these measurements. 6'9", 290 pounds, 52-inch chest, 39-inch waist, 20-inch bicep, 19-inch neck, and size 18D shoes.
It's a big cat.
Big cat.
Big cat.
But again, the whole thing is that he got the nickname because he was so big, but he moved so fast for a man of his size.
Yeah,
and
coming right off the line like that. So he had the name Big Cat long before even pro wrestling was in his periphery.
Yep, it was one of those things where he was legendary. Boston Patriots center John Morris said of Ernie Ladd, "It was so dark, I couldn't see the linebackers. I couldn't see the goalposts. It was like being locked in a closet going up against Ernie Ladd."
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and I might be, but I believe Ernie Ladd is also in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
He's in the San Diego Chargers Hall of Fame and in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
He's a 3-time All-AFL star, a 4-time AFL All-Star, AFL champion. This man did it all for the Chargers. And then the Houston Oilers and the Kansas City Chiefs from 61 to 68. If only his knees didn't give out, because he could have had a longer football career.
Yeah. Well, it was the benefit of pro wrestling, because that's when his career started in pro wrestling.
Now, here's the interesting thing, is that actually he started wrestling in 1961 as a publicity stunt. And from 61 until 69, he would sometimes wrestle in the summer during the offseason for football. So he actually was learning the business for like 9 years before he officially began in 1969.
Which is, well, when he started really needing to use it as a form of income. But
right, because this was at a time when wrestling was making more money than football players were.
yeah, well, it really wasn't until like the 80s into the 90s that really started to change for professional wrestling and football, you know, and that's really a fascinating part about it too. But, you know, Ernie had the personality, which he also probably developed a lot of that from shit talking on the gridiron.
Right. I mean, when it comes down to it, sports players are some of the best shit talkers.
It's true.
It's mind games. It's how you get underneath the skin of the opponent and make them possibly mess up.
Yeah, which is why Ernie Ladd was so good and effective as a heel, especially as he was starting out.
Yep, he had legendary feuds against guys like Wahoo McDaniels, the original Mr. Wrestling. He even was matched up against Andre the Giant, a.k.a. Andre the Dummy, or the Big Fat French Fry,
yep.
as he said during names.
Yep. And that was a really fun time, you know, in the mid-'70s with Ernie Ladd, you know, as we passed over and he'd get into All-Star Wrestling, I believe it was, which was Vince Sr.'s television. And that was the first time I had seen an Ernie Ladd match, was on the network, when I was getting into, like, what's the earliest I can find tape on the network. And this was a couple years ago, so who knows what they've added since. But it was an episode that had the Grand Wizard and and Superstar Billy Graham was there. And we were talking last year about this time about Dominic DeNucci, who had passed away, you know, right around this time last year. And You know, it had a ton of those people, but one of the matches was Ernie Ladd against two schlubs. And Ernie Ladd just beat the piss out of him and then cut a great promo afterwards, you know, and then there's, you know, he gets into the 80s and we start seeing him.
Well, hold on. He has a couple of really big matches. 1976, March 1st, against Bruno Sammartino in Madison Square Garden for the WWF title.
Yep. Which I thought about also adding on to this show, us watching that, because I scrolled down it, and I always liked Bruno's work, and Ernie as a heel is great. You know, maybe I'll watch that on my own time. But
a future match of the week, because we have not paid tribute to Bruno yet, and we should at some point.
True. That's not necessarily a bad idea, Sky. I don't disagree with that. So maybe there'll be more Ernie in our down the pass. And I do like Bruno Sammartino matches. I've watched quite a few, and they're just something to behold. They're a unique style, unique to Bruno.
Right. But he wrestled against guys like Bruno. He wrestled against Bob Backlund when Bob Backlund was the WWF champion. There's a match somewhere involving Ernie Ladd and Mil Mascares.
I can't imagine that. I can't picture that for some reason.
In a 2 out of 3 falls match, by the way, for the IWA, or the International Wrestling Association in New Jersey.
I'm so confused. I got to know about this. How did they get that match?
I don't know.
That's fascinating.
But yeah, he does all the stuff in the 70s, and then in the 80s, he leaves WWF for Bill Watts and Mid-South.
And that's where we picked him up in 1981. Well, he was there for a couple years, about a year prior anyway, but really going down to Bill Watts in 81, and we heard him on commentary with Bill Watts, and how could you not get just enthralled by that voice? But he also had very good things to say. It wasn't like he just had a voice and was saying nonsense. He had good points to bring to the table no matter what the situation was.
He was a sports commentator. He was an analyst. He was analyzing the matches as they were happening.
Yeah, and he could wrestle and he could talk. And that was the thing, is like he was so versatile in that he could really fill in any capacity that they needed him to be in.
Right. Afa and Sika probably would have gotten over on their own, but Ernie Ladd being their manager really helped their careers.
Gave him a plus. Gave him a big plus, and that's the way that Ernie was. He was, not only was he finding a lot of success in professional wrestling, but he was also learning ways to give that to other people at the same time, which is a really cool thing to have somebody who started in football to move to wrestling, to be able to do really in a relatively short amount of time. I guess he started in 61, but you're talking like going full-time pro wrestling, having 11 years under his belt by the time 81 goes around. That's not when it comes to pro wrestling, that's not a huge amount of time.
True, and it's one of those things where Ernie Ladd made his impact just because of his sheer talent. I mean, this is a dude that was charismatic, had size, learned the business pretty quickly, all things considered.
Yeah.
And really made his impact for the time that he was there for.
And basically, once he, his career basically came to a close in ring, because I think it was once again his knees that...
Yeah, there was only so much he could do. He had to retire in 86 due to knee problems.
Yeah, but he was basically involved with pro wrestling for as an agent or behind the scenes for the next at least 10 years, I'm pretty sure.
Funny enough, he was actually a commentator for WrestleMania 2 for the 20-man Battle Royale, which featured the NFL players.
Yeah, well, because who else would fit that role except for Ernie Ladd? It's a great thing. And he stayed active, at least trying to, help people in wrestling, get their footing, especially heading into the 90s. I can't remember what his last commitment was.
Well, here's the thing, is that before Bobby the Brain Heenan was with Gorilla Monsoon, it was Ernie Ladd who was with Gorilla Monsoon and Johnny Valiant. What a broadcast booth.
Yeah, that's a lot of personality in one table.
Right, and that was for the first few weeks of WWF Wrestling Challenge before Ladd got replaced by Bobby Heenan. And then he quietly retired in '98. Like, he had one more match in a battle royal, but that was it. Again, this is a guy who had a peaceful, quiet life and really got recognized. He was inducted into both the WCW and WWF Hall of Fames in '94, '95, back when they meant something.
Yeah. Well,
And he's
the WCW Hall of Fame only had 3 years as a Hall of Fame, so I don't know whether that one really meant something, but I know what you mean.
But, I mean, this is a guy who's in the Football Hall of Fame. He's in the Wrestling Hall of Fame. This is a real two-sport athlete right here.
Yeah. And maybe one of the biggest success stories of a crossover athlete in that respect. You know, I mean, who's the other one you could go to? I mean, maybe Goldberg? But Goldberg was really big in Georgia, but didn't really make much of a splash on the Falcons when he was on it. Michael Jordan was amazing in
guys who were successes at both ventures pretty highly. I mean, Ernie Ladd was one of the best defensive players in football at the time and became one of the best heels in wrestling. Goldberg can't say that about both, and his run was not nearly as long as Ernie's.
Yeah. I mean, right now, the closest we could come to it is probably Pat McAfee, but the business as a whole has changed so dramatically in both football and professional wrestling that, like, it's almost even still apples to oranges in that respect.
And it's not even just the whole wrestling part, because he did training too. I remember that Hall of Fame speech where Mark Henry gave a lot of credit to his career for working with Ernie Ladd.
Yeah, because, it wasn't just the wrestling about that Ernie Ladd understood. He understood the business and what the business was about and how it was meant to run and function. And that really was big too. And he was, as by all accounts, very honest with you about that. You know, he would tell it to you.
Come here under the learning tree, son, and listen to Ernie Ladd. Because I'm going to tell you.
He's selling like he's going to the electric chair. That's this fucking guy. He's got so many classic lines. Ernie Ladd is a truly remarkable talent and deserves far more accreditation of modern era than he is currently getting.
And it sucks too, because these are names that are going to go by the wayside as people eventually move on. But when you're talking about one of the best wrestlers of all time, you have to include Ernie Ladd in your list.
Yeah, one of the best. We were talking about Mount Rushmores earlier. You want to talk about, as far as like crossover athletes, and one of the most successful of that, as far as getting big and crushing both of your ventures as about as good as you possibly can. Ernie Ladd deserves at least to be a tour guide at that Mount Rushmore, if not on that Mount Rushmore, in my opinion, as far as drawing power is concerned, as far as wrestling ability is concerned, as far as talking ability is concerned. Big Cat Ernie Ladd was a lot more of a total package than people may think he was.
Yep, and to you, Ernie Ladd, wherever you are, because he died several years ago, here's one for you, Big Cat.
Yes, definitely, and much respect to Big Cat Ernie Ladd. He's definitely a staple of not just our sport, but also others, and also the NFL, and sorely missed by the people who really love those sports. So, Ernie, we do love you, and I can't wait to watch more of you. Truthfully, I want to see more Ernie Ladd. I think if we keep doing territory deep dives, we're going to get it.
I mean, I hate to say it, but I think next week is going to be Ernie Ladd and Bruno Sammartino. But the only way you're going to find out is to like, share, and subscribe to the Court-Martail podcast.
That's right,
Sean,
folks.
Thank you for letting me on this hosting.
Of course, and while I feel like we may have shared the hosting duty today, because we definitely kind of ping-ponged it back and forth, but that's what it's meant to be, right? That's why we've been on so many of these, and whether we talk about that next week, or we do a little deep dive into a territory, or we maybe have something else unique planned for you, you're not going to be able to know, like Skylar said, unless you do all the things that he just told you to do. And in that time, as we get set to get towards ACBW and NWL and the Grapplies at the end of the year, and all the other fun stuff we've got going on, thank you very much, Skylar. You did a great job as always. I will see you next week.
I'll see you next week.
And we will see all of you next week right after this.